For his analysis on the Sydney lockdowns and Kevin Rudd's dealings with Pfizer, all that, I'm joined from Canberra by the national editor of the Australian newspaper, Mr Dennis Shanahan. Dennis, we're expecting the Morrison government to announce extra economic and mental health support for Greater Sydney. We expect it, we're told it's imminent. Bit of disquiet, I have to say, in Victoria that was rejected in the fourth lockdown. Maybe this is a whole change of policy. What are you hearing?
Look, Peter, I think that clearly the government is trying to do the federal government is trying to do what it can in what is going to be a much more serious lockdown in New South Wales than it's had before. And this is going to be a lockdown that will go close to, I wouldn't be surprised, the lockdown in Victoria. Now, I think obviously there have been calls to return JobKeeper, and I think the government is right in holding back, saying no, there will not be a general return of JobKeeper, and that was just basically too costly to continue. What they are doing is continuing the special payments similar to JobKeeper, which were introduced for the last lockdown in Victoria. Let's remember that these measures were introduced for Victoria. And Victoria, of course, has had more than 2/3 of the federal government's emergency spending money. So I don't think it's a time when we need states to be picking on each other or trying to score points off each other when the federal government is still picking up a very large amount of money. Now, I think there's no doubt that the Sydney lockdown should have been called earlier. I think that Gladys Berejiklian missed the opportunity to go hard and go early, as Daniel Andrews said in Victoria. And I think that we're now seeing what is going to be a longer lockdown, a more expensive lockdown, because there was a hesitancy to lock down in the first place.
Yeah, I just want to pick up a point though, the disaster payments, which is what it's modelled on, the federal government support is not a rebooted JobKeeper, and I agree with Josh Frydenberg's view that would be counterproductive. But what they're paying now in Victoria in the recent lockdown here, number 4, and what they now will pay in New South Wales is only pay for the period of the lockdown. Now, if it runs very long in New South Wales, let's hope that is sufficient to get people by. But there's not money coming into Victoria now beyond the regularised dole. I guess what it has to be, Dennis, is fair for everyone. Whatever they land on has to be transparent and available to all states if they find themselves back in this situation.
Well, that's right, Peter. And that's why the disaster payments, which were paid initially to Victoria, they were created to help Victorians through a shorter lockdown, and they now apply. And that point was made then that they would apply nationally, that it wasn't a special bailout for Victoria. And so they are.
I agree with that. There has to be transparent. Yeah, look, it has to be transparent. It has to apply to everyone. Otherwise, you're going to get this issue with the states. Let's do the news this afternoon that ATAGI is going to meet now and reconsider that previous advice. God help us, this is changing by the day. But that previous advice in relation to AstraZeneca, this is that now it's only recommended or preferred for people over the age of 60. Of course, anyone can have it if they want it, and their GP will give it to them, but over 60 is the ATAGI advice. Because of the changing risk profile, we've told, of catching COVID in Sydney, they may well revise their advice, for the 5th time, perhaps. What do you think of that, Dennis?
Look, there has been a problem with the appearance of AstraZeneca almost from the beginning. And we've had mixed messages from the medical establishment. We've had some claims by some health officials, which we could have done better without. And really, the changing recommendations haven't changed the fundamental availability of AstraZeneca to anyone over 16. From the beginning, it has been available for younger people as long as they check with their doctor. I know various people under 40 who have had AstraZeneca for various reasons. Now, I think that this, yet again, after a series of reports we saw out of Europe right at the beginning, Germany and Denmark and so forth, they started to have problems. We've seen a lot of publicity about this, and yet another recommendation I don't think is going to help AstraZeneca as appeal to Australians anymore. It's just more confusion It's understandable. Everything changes. We've seen the Delta variant. Things change, but it does make it more difficult and puts much more importance on the arrival of these Pfizer doses from the US.
Oh, well, let's get to those, because that extraordinary story last night and again today involving Kevin Rudd and Pfizer. We saw at the top of the program, Pfizer has released a statement today saying that reports that a third party or individual had a role in the contractual agreements between Pfizer and the Commonwealth are inaccurate. Now, Kevin Rudd says he didn't claim responsibility for Pfizer being fast-tracked. He says that now, and that his earlier statements are consistent with what Pfizer has said today. Dennis, I have to say to people at home, in my experience in government and opposition, it is not unusual when former Prime Ministers have got a special connection, if it can be useful for Australia, that they can be called on or they can make an offer to assist. But in my experience, I've seen it happen a number of times. It's all been done very quietly. What did you make of this story?
Yes, indeed, Peter. In fact, I've had some experience of former Prime Ministers speaking to current Prime Ministers and former Prime Ministers speaking to former Prime Ministers in quiet, back-channel ways. It's not done as openly as it is done in the United States, or as formally as it is in the United States, where former presidents come in to help, particularly in international areas. Look, I think that Kevin Rudd has got a high profile in the United States as the head of the Asia Institute. He appeared regularly on television there, and as a fundraiser at the Asia Institute and at the UN, has a lot of links through the United States. It is natural for him to want to help, and he has spoken to Scott Morrison previously on other issues which have been kept quiet, just referred to. And I think that what he's done at this time, he's acted in goodwill for Australia. And obviously, being a politician, he's not averse to getting some credit for having done what he's done. But I also fear that for Kevin Rudd's sake, it's made to look like he is claiming credit for the deal. He is specifically saying he did not, and nor does he actually wish to be associated with Scott Morrison's vaccine rollout, calling it botched. So I think what we've had here is a head of steam in a story which was going one way against the government, has turned back around, and I think it's probably a bit of an embarrassment for all those involved. And I would just say, I think Kevin Rudd, in the past, like other former Prime Ministers, has acted in goodwill and spoken, communicated to Scott Morrison. And I think let's not make too much of this. As Greg Hunt said today, the difficulty with getting the Pfizer shots and that bringing forward of those million shots a week was about the supply, not about the negotiations.
I agree with all of that, Dennis, except the letter got out, and I think that's where it was playing politics. That's where it was playing politics. But anyway, we'll give him sort of a nice boost of goodwill there tonight from both of us. Dennis Shanahan, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Take it away you can get it, Mr. Rudd. Take it away you can get it.